when Donald Trump enters the illuminated stage of Real Perspectives with Garrett Norman, the audience expects a debate of some kind. But Garrett doesn't want dialogue. He wants controversy. In just a few seconds, the trap he has set can turn against him in spectacular fashion. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and ring the bell to be notified whenever there are new stories on the channel. The sun was high over the wide avenues of Dallas, Texas. It was early afternoon when Donald Trump arrived at the luxurious Lone Star Broadcast building. Inside, journalists were running around adjusting microphones, lighting designers were testing, spotlights and a last-minute rehearsal was taking place behind the heavy red curtains of the main stage. The program Real Perspectives with Garrett Norman would be broadcast live that night, promising a fervent interview with one of the most famous and, for many, most controversial names in the United States. In the dressing room, Trump was sitting in a leather chair, concentrating, listening to the final instructions of his longtime advisor, Rebecca Miller, a determined woman with a firm voice and elegant bearing. She was adjusting his tie while speaking in a tense tone. Look, Garrett Norman is a host who loves to manipulate situations. He likes to force controversies, especially with Republican figures. I've seen him ask trick questions about liberal policies, insult conservative values, and mess with people who aren't ready. Trump replied, without looking away from the mirror, "Rebecca, don't worry. I know the profile of these headline-seeking interviewers. He thinks he's going to corner me, but you know what happens when someone tries to put me against the wall." Rebecca gave a small smile and fixed the microphone on his lapel. "That's exactly what I'm afraid of, but I trust you can handle it." In the production room, Garrett Norman watched the crew set up the stage. On the other side of the glass wall, the audience was starting to arrive. Garrett, a tall man with carefully combed blonde hair, was checking notes with Philip Carter, one of the producers responsible for the evening's hot topics. Philip was sifting through a pile of reports and social media clicks, looking for any recent stories that might generate controversy. We have to catch him contradicting himself. He talks a lot about patriotism, but let's see if he can withstand questions about public spending, lobbying with Democratic groups, and these recent controversies from radical supporters. If he slips up, it'll be headlines in the liberal papers. Garrett sighed, with a glint of determination in his eye. The audience wants confrontation, and I will deliver. If Trump shows himself to be insecure, the whole internet will go crazy. A few minutes later, the spotlights illuminated the studio. The opening vignette played loudly and the audience applauded as Garrett Norman entered the stage. He raised the microphone, face confident. "Good evening, Dallas, and good evening, United States. This is Real Perspectives with Garrett Norman, where we're not afraid to ask what no one else is asking. And today, we welcome one of the best-known figures in American politics. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Donald Trump." The audience applauded intensely, although suspicious murmurs were also heard. Trump entered the stage, waving. He greeted Garrett with a firm handshake and sat down in a comfortable armchair. Garrett smiled for the cameras. "So, Mr. Trump, it's a pleasure to have you here. The Republican public has been demanding your presence on this program for some time now. How does it feel to finally be here, live, talking to me and the whole country?" Trump straightened up and spoke in a calm tone. "I feel very good, Garrett. It's always good to be able to talk directly to people. I know you like tough questions and I don't shy away from debates, whether it's with liberals, Democrats, or anyone who has something to say." A few claps resounded. Garrett leaned forward in a slightly provocative tone. "Good, because I have several questions that the public wants answered clearly. Let's get straight to the point." Garrett opened a note card. "In recent months, criticism has arisen about certain programs aimed at the working class which, according to liberal analysts, you have not properly supported. Some say that you prefer tax cuts for big businessmen to initiatives that benefit ordinary citizens. What do you have to say about that?" Trump raised an eyebrow. "That's typical. Whenever a conservative talks about cutting taxes, they say, 'We only favor big corporations.' I talk about strengthening the economy for everyone. But the mainstream media relies on a democratic talking point to paint any tax cut as evil. What these critics ignore is that when small and medium-sized businesses pay less taxes, they hire more people, generate more prosperity and economic freedom. Garrett gave a calculated smile. Interesting, but what about the people who can't? Get a job and don't fit into this prosperity model? Is charity enough to solve that? Or is there a systemic issue that requires broad social policies? Trump leaned his elbows on the armrests, his voice firm. I'm not against well-targeted social policies, but you have to agree that if the Democratic or Republican government just hands out money without long-term planning, it creates dependency. I believe in the strength of the nation to undertake, not in treating the people as if they were incapable of winning on their own. The clapping sounded louder now, mixed with some booing. It seemed that the audience was divided. Garrett spotted the opportunity to stir things up and continued. Interesting point of view, Mr. Trump. But don't you think that sometimes these people are so marginalized that they can't find their way to entrepreneurship? Trump looked him straight in the eye. I believe that many need a helping hand. Opportunities, yes, but not a policy that turns the citizen into a hostage of bureaucracy. I have worked and helped countless social causes. Even so, everyone knows that I can't solve historic problems overnight. What we need is autonomy and real economic growth. Garrett forced a short laugh. Well, we'll see if the audience agrees with you or not. Before Trump could respond, Garrett turned to the audience. Who here thinks that Mr. Trump dodges some questions about social responsibility? Half the audience raised their hands or mumbled a yes. The other half protested, defending Trump. There was a growing buzz. Garrett, satisfied, took the floor again. Yeah, we have people here who think your positions are too harsh, but let's move on. Trump didn't show any discomfort. He just watched. At that moment, Rebecca Miller, backstage, watched worriedly. Next to her, Jake Turner, the stage manager, muttered, "He's inciting the audience. Garrett wants to create a ruckus and make Trump lose his temper." Rebecca pressed her lips together. Donald won't fall for it. He knows exactly what he's doing. Garrett opened a new card. If we're talking about controversy, we can't ignore certain comments you've made at closed events that are considered offensive. Harsh words against political rivals, including women in the Democratic Party. Can you confirm that? Trump stood his ground. Look, Garrett, let's be honest. A lot of things are taken out of context, distorted by the biased press. I have used strong terms. Yes, especially when referring to people who try to defame me or attack my Republican values. I won't deny that sometimes I speak harshly, but it all depends on the context. And I'm not the only one who uses harsh words against opponents. Garrett made a face of exaggerated surprise. So you admit that you've cursed and insulted Democratic politicians, called someone a liberal asshole or something worse? Trump frowned and replied bluntly, "I'm not a priest, Garrett. If you attack me, I'll respond. And yes, I have used strong terms like hypocritical clown to refer to certain politicians who lie blatantly. What's wrong with telling the truth about them? We need to stop the hypocrisy of pretending to be saints." The audience reacted, partly in approving laughter, partly in indignation. Some shouts echoed, "Garrett, ask something relevant," or "Trump, stop deflecting." The atmosphere was increasingly charged with tension. Garrett stood up, approaching the cameras to make an impact. "We have a document here that was sent anonymously to our production." He held up a folder. In it, there is evidence that you, Donald Trump, have donated large sums to questionable institutions linked to ultranationalist groups that preach hatred towards minorities. How do you explain these donations? The audience was completely silent. Rebecca, backstage, widened her eyes. Trump became serious. "That's false. I defy anyone to prove that I have deliberately donated to hate groups. I have always supported causes that promote development and security. If any extremist group has received third-party funding, it has nothing to do with me." Garrett shook the envelope. According to behind-the-scenes sources, that money came out of a business account linked to your name. Trump raised his voice, but without shouting. These sources should be investigated before they are used to smear. If there is an illegal transaction, I'm the first one interested in knowing who is using my name, but I don't recognize any donations to intolerance groups. And I will prove that this is slander. A tense murmur swept through the room. Garrett took a deep breath, as if victorious. Well, Mr. Trump, that story will still be investigated. But let's talk about something else in the meantime. Despite his discomfort, Trump turned to Garrett and said, "That sounds like a desperate attempt to make headlines. Do you expect me to panic at being accused of something I didn't do? Or are you betting that I'm going to lose it live?" Garrett blinked, as if not expecting this direct counterattack. "No, Mr. Trump, I just ask questions that the public wants answered." "Questions based on hearsay aren't questions. They're empty accusations," Trump retorted. The audience broke into applause and booing, turning the studio into a stage for conflict. Someone shouted from the back, "We want proof of everything!" Another retorted, "He's running away!" Chaos threatened to overtake the place, and Garrett tried to regain control. Garrett raised his hand, asking for silence. "Everyone will have a chance to speak later. But Mr. Trump, since you mentioned generosity and donations, why don't you talk more about your charitable campaigns? For war veterans, at-risk families and everything else. Some say that, deep down, it's just self-promotion. Pure strategy to maintain his image among conservatives and patriots." Trump inhaled slowly. A slight smile appeared on his lips. "I've cared about war veterans since before I dreamed of running for any political office. It's my obligation to support those who have served our country. It's not about being a Democrat, Republican, or liberal. It's about respect. I have never promoted myself on the back of these donations. It's the press that makes a fuss." Garrett, with a sarcastic sneer, added, "But let's face it, all politicians like the spotlight on these social initiatives, don't they?" Trump shrugged. "Some do. I prefer to believe that helping people in need speaks for itself. And if that annoys people who don't like me, that's fine." At that point, Philip Carter, the producer, gave Garrett a signal. There were only a few minutes left until the next break. They needed a big bombshell moment to close the block. Garrett looked at his watch, analyzed his chips, and decided to play his last card. Garrett approached, stopping in front of Trump, almost invading his personal space. "To close this block, there's a question everyone is asking. You always defend the greatness of America. You extol traditional Republican values. But what about you as a person, away from the stage, without cameras, without an audience? Who is Donald Trump? Don't you think that the persona you display in public is just a facade?" Trump stared at Garrett for a moment in deep silence. Then he leaned forward, his gaze firm but calm. "You know, Garrett, a lot of people think I'm just this figure who talks loudly, who speaks out against liberal policies, or who disagrees with progressive agendas. But the truth is that I care about this country. I've made mistakes. Who hasn't? I say harsh things. But I've always believed in the strength of the American citizen, whether they're a Democrat, a Republican, or someone who doesn't care about politics. If that's a facade for you, then perhaps you should review what you mean by authenticity." The audience erupted in applause, with a few dissenting voices booing. Garrett tried to make a point. "So you admit that part of what you do is playing a role?" Trump gestured with his hand, disapproving of the simplification. "Interpreting. I live intensely what I believe. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm not an actor. I'm a man who speaks his mind, no matter who it hurts." Garrett snorted, not knowing how to regain control. The interval signal flashed on the teleprompter. He nervously raised the microphone. "We'll be back after the break with more controversial questions. Don't go anywhere." The studio lights went down and the transition music played. As production rushed to rearrange the set, Trump stood up and headed backstage. Garrett stood staring into the void, not sure whether to celebrate or worry. This man, who had come to be unmasked, had turned the tables by maintaining his posture. The trap was beginning to look less effective. In the narrow corridor, Rebecca approached Trump. "You're doing well, but they're going to bring more charges in the next block. We've received information that Garrett has sent people to investigate situations in his private life. Maybe they'll try to expose some family scandal." Trump sighed, straightening his jacket. "Let them try. The truth always comes out, Rebecca." Meanwhile, Garrett, in another backstage area, was raging at Philip Carter. "He won't lose control. I need him to get angry, say something politically incorrect, attack someone in an exaggerated way, anything that generates a viral clip." Philip flipped through his notes, distressed. "We can insist on this supposed dossier about suspicious donations, but if it's all lies, we run the risk of being sued." Garrett took a deep breath, looking angrily at the closed stage curtain. "This is the time to bet big. I'll take my chances or we'll look ridiculous in this story." The studio lights came back on. The audience quietened down and Garrett returned to the stage with a firm voice. "We're back. Now, Mr. Trump, the networks are on fire. One question that comes up strongly. How do you feel about being singled out by some Democratic commentators and even famous liberals as one of those largely responsible for the polarization of the country?" Trump gave a small smile. "Polarization didn't start with me. It has been intensifying for years, fueled by groups that refuse to dialogue and prefer only to label. If I was afraid of different points of view, I wouldn't be here. I love to debate. But I see a lot of liberals and Democrats who can't stand being questioned. They call anyone who disagrees with their ideas a fascist, a racist, and so on." Garrett raised an eyebrow. "So, you think they're the ones fomenting hatred?" Trump folded his hands. "I think there are people on all sides who exaggerate, but the media and certain Democratic politicians take advantage of this to push an agenda that divides the country. I'm not going to say that the Republicans are saints, but it's hypocritical to blame me for the polarization, as if it was something that was mine alone." At that point, from the audience, a man named Raymond Barnes, a well-known local activist, stood up. "Mr. Trump, since you're talking about hypocrisy, explain why you supported cuts that hurt public schools here in Texas. That's heartbreaking for our young people." Trump looked directly at Raymond. "I didn't cut education funding. I defended the idea of reorganizing investments to give families the freedom to choose schools that work best, including charter schools or even community initiatives. If you think that hurts anyone, I would say that the current system is not working as it should, and we need to try something different." Raymond retorted, "It only favors those who already have the money to pay for private schools." Trump shook his head. "The concept is to expand options, not elitize. But I understand your concerns. If you want, I can present you with data that shows good results in several states." Raymond was about to continue, but Garrett intervened. "Calm down. We still have a lot to discuss. Raymond, thank you for participating." Garrett decided it was time to drop the final bombshell. "Mr. Trump, I wanted to save this for last, but it seems appropriate now. Yesterday, we received an audio in which you allegedly call certain Democratic voters ignorant and lazy who only want to depend on the state. The audio has not yet been verified, but I would like to know, do you deny having said that?" A murmur of astonishment ran through the studio. Some in the audience reacted with indignation, others with curiosity. Rebecca, backstage, clasped her hands apprehensively. Trump leaned forward. "First of all, I assure you that I never used those exact words. The media loves to create sensationalist phrases. Secondly, if anyone is a liberal or a Democrat and expects me to apologize for what I didn't say, forget it. I'm not going to. I may have said that there are people who prefer to live on welfare, and that goes for people who vote for Democrats, as well as Republicans. I don't like people who do nothing to improve their lives. But from there to calling all Democrats ignorant and lazy is a big difference." Garrett tried to press. "So you recognize that you called part of the electorate lazy?" Trump raised his voice a little. "I said there are lazy people in all walks of life. You want to turn that into a general insult, Garrett. It's something the media does all the time. They take a statement and paint it the way they want, turning it into a spectacle. The audience broke into shouts of approval and protests. The noise grew, and Garrett felt that his final card wasn't working. Trump wasn't melting down in the face of the accusation. Instead, he was standing firm and returning the criticism. On the other side of the stage, Philip Carter was making desperate signs because the program was coming to an end, and Garrett hadn't managed to put Trump in check. Without much choice, Garrett tried to interrupt Trump, raising his voice. "We're on the air, Mr. Trump, and I can't allow that kind of speech to be normalized without question." Trump looked at the audience, then back at Garrett. "Garrett, you invited me on your show saying that I could speak openly, but it seems you really wanted a trap. If you call questioning hate speech, I ask you, who is trying to manipulate whom?" Part of the audience erupted in applause, while Garrett, not knowing what to say, backed away slightly. His face was red with frustration. The bombshell moment he had planned had turned against him because Trump had not released any phrase that could be used out of context without generating strong suspicions of manipulation on the part of the program itself. On social media, the repercussions began to gain momentum. People commented that Garrett was pushing the envelope and that the accusations were vague. Others defended Garrett, claiming that Trump wasn't clear in his answers and was evading responsibility. But the truth was that control of the narrative had slipped out of the host's hands. Philip Carter signaled last minute to Garrett, who was sweating as he faced the camera. "Well, unfortunately, we're running out of time. Mr. Trump, would you like to leave the audience with a final message?" Trump took a deep breath, leaning back in his chair. "Yes, I believe our country has enormous challenges, and not everyone will agree with me. But we need real dialogue, not empty attacks. If we want to overcome prejudice, humiliation, and hasty judgments, we need respect. And respect doesn't mean agreeing with everything, but making room for truth and justice. That's the message I'm leaving." Applause filled the studio. Even those who didn't agree with Trump seemed to admire his firmness when he spoke. Garrett, looking tired, turned to the cameras. "I appreciate Donald Trump's presence on our program. Thank you also to the audience, who participated intensely. We'll be back next week here on Real Perspectives with Garrett Norman. Good night, Dallas." The lights went out and the closing vignette sounded. Garrett and Trump exchanged a quick handshake. Trump then left the stage accompanied by Rebecca, while the presenter walked away to the opposite side, visibly dejected. In the stands, most people got up to leave, but several curious people crowded around, still agitated, commenting on the interview. That same day, the interview went viral on internet forums. Some media outlets tried to distort Trump's remarks. Others pointed out serious flaws in the way Garrett conducted the conversation, accusing him of being biased. What became clear is that, in trying to humiliate Trump, Garrett Norman found himself cornered by his own lack of evidence and questions that were overly loaded with political intent. Trump headed for the airport, confident that he had come out on top. Rebecca, standing next to him, commented, "It looks like Garrett's plan backfired. Do you think this will have any lasting effect?" Trump shrugged. "Maybe, but that's not what matters. What matters is that people see the truth. If anyone was undecided about my character, perhaps today they've seen that I won't bow to cheap smears." Rebecca smiled, relieved. "Your final message about respect and fairness was the highlight." Trump agreed. "I hope people understand that the biggest lesson is not about me or Garrett Norman. It's about how we should treat each other without letting insults and manipulation end our unity as a nation." Within days, the Real Perspectives program faced a barrage of criticism from viewers, including Republicans and even Democrats who didn't agree with Garrett's aggressive stance. The presenter tried to justify himself, but the damage had already been done. For many, he had crossed the line, turning the program into something personal. The moral of the story is that harsh words can hurt, but truth and coherence usually prevail when we are true to our principles. In the arena of political disputes, it's easy to fall into traps and make hasty judgments. However, understanding and open dialogue with respect and empathy is the only way for any nation, liberal or Republican, to grow united. When self-interest and cheap insults fail, the lesson remains. True strength lies in listening, learning, and maintaining dignity, even under pressure.